coffins were empty. That was the detail that broke Callum Thornwood, the most feared alpha on the entire eastern seaboard. Two tiny mahogany boxes sat at the front of the great hall, polished to a mirror, shine, waiting to be lowered into the frozen Montana earth. They were meant to hold the bodies of his twin sons. Instead, they held nothing but the suffocating weight of a father's grief. The Thornwood pack stood in absolute silence. 300 wolves packed into the ancestral manor, dressed in black, their heads bowed. The smell of pine and expensive scotch that usually filled these ancient stone halls had been replaced by something far more terrible: the acrid metallic tang of collective despair. When a pack loses its heirs, it loses its future. When an alpha loses his children, he loses his soul. Callum stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window in his private study, staring out at the relentless blizzard that had been hammering the Rockies for 4 straight days. He was a man of 32, though tonight he looked 50. His dark hair hung disheveled across his forehead. His jaw, normally clean-shaven to military precision, was covered in 4 days of stubble. His eyes, usually a commanding, piercing amber that could make grown warriors drop to their knees, were dull and bloodshot. He hadn't shifted into his wolf form in 4 days. He hadn't eaten in 3. He had barely slept at all. The study door opened behind him. Callum didn't turn. He knew the footsteps. Heavy boots on ancient oak floors. Measured, careful, respectful. Callum. It was Rhodes Kane, his beta and oldest friend. Rhodes was the only man brave enough to enter the Alpha's private space right now. Anyone else would have been flattened by the oppressive aura of dominance and grief radiating off Callum like heat from a furnace. The bond between Alpha and Pack was fraying. Every wolf in the building could feel it. Their leader was dying inside, and when an Alpha breaks, the entire pack crumbles with him. "The council is seated," Rhodes said quietly. His voice was low, rough from years of military service before he'd returned to the pack. "The ceremony needs to begin. The pack needs to see you, Alpha. They're scared. The bond is unraveling." Callum gripped the window frame until the wood splintered under his fingers. Splinters pierced his palm. He didn't feel it. "Let it unravel," he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel scraping against stone. "My sons are gone, Rhodes. What does the pack matter if the legacy is dead?" "They aren't just a legacy," Rhodes said, stepping further into the room. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the hushed whispers of the household staff in the hallway. "They were Grayson and Beckett. They were our pups, too. The whole pack is mourning with you. But you are the pillar holding up this roof. If you crumble, Callum Thornwood crumbles. And with the encroaching threats from the southern territories, we cannot afford to look weak." Callum let out a bitter, dry laugh. It was a terrible sound, empty of all humor. "We are weak. I lost them. I lost them in a storm I should have predicted on a patrol route. I should have secured better." The tragedy had happened 3 days ago. The details replayed in Callum's mind on an endless, torturous loop. The nanny, a trusted Omega named Sarah, had taken the 4-year-old twins for a short walk along the eastern perimeter. It was supposed to be safe. It had been safe for 50 years. The perimeter was warded, patrolled, monitored. But a freak blizzard had rolled in with supernatural speed, whiteout conditions that blinded even wolf sight. When the patrol found Sarah hours later, she was at the bottom of a ravine, her neck broken from a fall. The twins were gone. The search parties had combed every inch of the forest for 72 hours straight. Hundreds of warriors in wolf form, their superior senses working overtime. Thermal drones cutting through the snow. They found a small mitten snagged on a thorn bush. They found scent trails that vanished abruptly at the edge of the river that was currently half frozen and raging with whitewater rapids. The conclusion was inevitable. No pup, not even an alpha-blooded one, could survive 3 nights in sub-zero temperatures without shelter. The search had been called off at dawn. The coffins had been ordered by sunset. "I have to bury empty boxes, Rhodes," Callum whispered, the fight draining out of him. His shoulders sagged. "How do I do that?" "You do it because you are Alpha Thornwood," Rhodes said firmly. He placed a hand on Callum's shoulder, gripping hard. "And because Seraphine is downstairs waiting to see if you're broken." At the mention of Seraphine, a low growl vibrated deep in Callum's chest. It was an involuntary response, the kind of sound an alpha makes when confronting a threat. Seraphine Vale was the mother of the twins, but she was not his mate, not his fated mate. Their union had been political, arranged by the council elders to secure a land treaty with the Vale family. Seraphine was cold, ambitious, and had never shown much affection for Grayson and Beckett. She viewed them more as insurance policies than children, heirs to secure her position. Since the boys went missing, she had been disturbingly composed, more concerned with funeral arrangements and optics than the search itself. She's already asking about the succession, Callum spat. The words tasted like poison. The bodies aren't even cold. We haven't even said goodbye. And she's asking if I can sire more heirs. She is pragmatic to a fault, Rhodes said diplomatically. He had never liked Seraphine, but he was careful to keep pack politics out of his tone. But she is also suffering in her own way. Is she? Yeah. Callum turned finally, his face a mask of exhausted rage. She called off the search 2 hours before I did. She ordered those coffins before the sunset yesterday. Rhodes had no answer to that, because it was true. Come downstairs, Callum, he said quietly. Please. Callum straightened his jacket. It was a black suit, perfectly tailored, though it hung differently on him now. He'd lost weight. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life. He walked past the nursery on his way to the grand staircase. The door was open. He couldn't bring himself to close it. The scent of baby powder and earth still lingered inside. 2 unmade beds with flannel sheets decorated with wolves and pine trees. A toy wolf lying on the braided rug, its stuffing coming out of one ear where Beckett had chewed it. It felt like a physical blow to his gut, stealing the air from his lungs. He descended the grand staircase. The great hall was packed wall to wall. Hundreds of pack members stood shoulder to shoulder in black suits and dresses, their heads bowed in mourning. The silence was absolute, not a single whisper, not a cough, just the sound of the wind howling outside and the crackle of the massive fireplace. At the front, near the makeshift altar that had been erected beneath the ancient Thornwood crest, stood Seraphine. She looked impeccable in a black designer dress that probably cost more than most pack members made in a month. A lace veil covered her dry eyes. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a flawless chignon. She nodded to Callum as he approached. It was a gesture completely devoid of warmth. Callum took his place beside the small caskets. He looked out at the sea of faces. His cousins. His warriors. The council elders in their gray ceremonial robes. They all looked terrified. They were mourning the pups, yes, but they were also mourning the future of the pack. Without heirs, the Thornwood bloodline was vulnerable. Without heirs, other families would begin circling like vultures. Elder Thomas, a man with skin like ancient parchment and eyes that had seen a century of pack history, stepped up to the podium. His hand shook slightly as he gripped the edges of the wood. We gather tonight, he began, his voice thin and wavering, to return 2 bright souls to the moon goddess. Taken too soon from this world, Grayson and Beckett were the light of this pack, the hope of our future. Callum tuned him out. He couldn't listen to empty platitudes. He stared at the wood grain of the coffin on the left. Grayson's coffin, the boy who had laughed louder than any child Callum had ever known, who had climbed everything fearless and wild. I'm sorry, Callum thought, projecting the thought with all the force of his alpha spirit, hoping somehow it would reach the afterlife wherever his sons had gone. I'm sorry I wasn't there. Outside, the wind battered the heavy oak doors of the mansion. It sounded like a scream. And though their bodies are lost to the river, Elder Thomas continued, his voice cracking with emotion, their spirits remain with us. We commend them to the earth and creak. It wasn't a loud sound, but for a room full of werewolves with heightened hearing, it was like a gunshot. Every head in the hall turned toward the entrance. The heavy iron latch of the main doors was lifting. Someone was trying to get in from outside. Ignore it, Seraphine hissed under her breath, leaning slightly toward Callum. It's just the wind, or a late patrol. No, Callum whispered. He felt something strange, a prickle at the base of his neck, a charge in the air like static electricity before a lightning strike. The doors groaned. They were massive things, solid oak, reinforced with iron, designed to withstand sieges. They weighed hundreds of pounds each. But they were pushing inward now, scraping against the stone floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. A gust of freezing wind blew into the hall, and with it came a vortex of snow. The candles in the first 3 rows of pews extinguished instantly, plunging that section of the room into shadow. The pack murmured, shifting uneasily. Through the widening gap in the doors, a figure struggled. It was a person small, fighting against the weight of the door and the fury of the blizzard beyond. Callum didn't wait. He stepped off the raised platform where the coffin sat, moving down the center aisle with long, purposeful strides. Alpha, wait, Rhodes called out, his hand moving instinctively to the sidearm he wore beneath his jacket, his military training kicking in. This could be a threat, an attack. The figure managed to squeeze through the gap and let the door slam shut behind them, cutting off the howl of the wind. The boom echoed through the hall like a drum. Silence returned, but this time it was a stunned silence. Standing on the plush Persian runner at the back of the hall was a woman. She was human. Callum could smell it immediately, the lack of wolf blood, the purely human scent sharp and distinct in a room full of predators. She was dressed in heavy hiking gear, snow pants, and a thick waterproof jacket, but it was all tattered and torn. Her face was deathly pale, her lips blue with hypothermia. Her red hair, vivid even in the dim candlelight, was matted with ice and twigs. She looked like she had walked through hell itself. But it wasn't the woman that made Callum's heart stop. She was wearing an oversized, heavy-down coat zipped up to her chin, and the coat was moving. There was something inside it, something alive. The woman swayed on her feet, clearly delirious. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the hundreds of large, imposing strangers in black suits staring at her. She didn't seem to realize she had just walked into a den of apex predators. Her voice was a cracked whisper, barely audible even to wolf ears. I saw the lights. Seraphine stepped forward, her face twisted in annoyance. Who is this? She snapped. Get this human out of here. This is a private ceremony. Stop! Callum's voice cut through the hall like a blade. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. The alpha tone, a sonic frequency that forced submission from lower-ranking wolves. The sound shook the chandeliers overhead. The two enforcers who had begun moving toward the woman froze instantly. They dropped to one knee in instinctive submission, their heads bowed. Callum walked toward the woman slowly. He moved the way one might approach a frightened deer, careful not to spook her. But as he got closer, the scent hit him. Underneath the wet wool, the pine needles, the human sweat, there was something else. Something that hit his olfactory senses like a drug, flooding his brain with chemicals he didn't understand. It was sweet, wildflowers and vanilla. But layered over that, beneath that, woven through it, was a scent that made his wolf sit up and take notice. His blood. He could smell his own blood. The woman's knees buckled. Callum was there in a blur of motion, faster than human eyes could track. He caught her before she hit the floor, his hands gripping her arms. She was freezing. Her body temperature was dangerously low. He could feel it even through her thick jacket. I found them, she mumbled. Her eyes rolling back in her head, consciousness slipping. They were so cold. I tried to keep them warm. Found who? Callum asked. His voice was trembling now, though he couldn't explain why. He was holding her upright, his large hands steadying her. Found who? The woman fumbled with the zipper of her coat. Her fingers were stiff and red, clumsy with frostbite. She couldn't get the zipper down. It was stuck, or she was too weak. Help me, she gasped. Callum reached out. His hand, so much larger than hers, grasped the zipper tab. He pulled it down slowly, carefully. The coat fell open. A small, furry head popped out from inside. Then another. 2 wolf pups. They were in their shifted forms, tiny balls of gray and black fur. They were shivering violently, huddled against the woman's chest, tucked inside her fleece sweater for warmth. Their eyes were closed, their breathing shallow. A collective gasp went through the room. It sounded like all the oxygen being sucked out of the hall at once. Grayson, Callum choked out. He recognized the gray pup instantly. The pattern of the markings on his face, the shape of his ears. The pup on the left let out a weak, high-pitched yip. It licked the woman's chin with a tiny pink tongue. Beckett, Callum whispered, looking at the second pup. The black one, smaller, quieter. Always quieter. They were alive, emaciated, soaking wet, terrified, but alive. They wouldn't walk, the woman slurred. Her head was resting against Callum's chest, now her energy completely spent. I had to carry them. The river? The bridge was out. I didn't know where else to go. I saw the lights. Callum looked at her. Really looked at her. She was tiny compared to him, maybe 5'3" at most. She had carried 2 40-pound wolf pups through a blizzard over a mountain pass for God knows how many miles. Get the healer, Callum screamed. The sound tore from his throat, raw and desperate. Now! Chaos erupted. The solemn funeral dissolved into a frenzy of motion. Get blankets. Rhodes was shouting, mobilizing the pack like the military commander he used to be. Hot water move. Seraphine stood frozen at the altar. Her face had drained of all color. She stared at the pups as if they were ghosts, and she didn't look relieved. She looked horrified. Genuinely, deeply horrified. She stared at the pups and then at the woman, and something dark flickered behind her ice-blue eyes. Callum fell to his knees on the stone floor, lowering the woman and his sons gently. He didn't care about his expensive suit. He didn't care about the council watching. He ripped off his own jacket and wrapped it around the pups. You're safe, he whispered to them, nuzzling their cold, damp fur with his cheek. You're safe now. Papa's here. They whined weak little sounds that broke his heart. They tried to crawl toward him, recognizing his scent, but they refused to leave the woman. Beckett sank his little teeth into the woman's sweater, anchoring himself to her. A small, shaky voice echoed in Callum's mind. It was the telepathic link, the bond between Alpha and Pack, weak and fragile, but there. She kept us warm, Papa. It was Grayson, speaking directly into Callum's consciousness. Callum looked down at the unconscious woman. Her red hair was splayed out on the dark stone floor like a halo of fire. Blood from his scraped palm had smeared onto her jacket. She had saved the heirs of Thornwood. She had done what his entire pack of trained warriors couldn't do. "Who are you?" Callum whispered, brushing a wet strand of hair from her frozen forehead. As his skin touched hers, something happened. A spark, hotter than fire, stronger than lightning. It shot up his arm and straight into his heart like a bolt of pure electricity. His inner wolf, which had been curled in a tight ball of depression for days, suddenly stood up, threw back its head, and howled. "Mate." The word slammed into Callum's mind with the force of a freight train. He recoiled, staring at her in shock, his hand jerking back as if he'd been burned. A human. His fated mate was a human, and she had just walked into his house carrying his children from another woman. "Alpha." Dr. Hale, the pack doctor, slid onto his knees beside them. He was a man in his 50s, silver-haired, with steady hands and calm eyes. He snapped open a medical kit, pulling out a stethoscope and a penlight. "I need to take the pups to the infirmary," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "And her. She's hypothermic. Her heart rate is thready. She needs immediate warming and IV fluids." "Take the pups," Callum commanded. His voice was steel again, the Alpha returning. "I will take her." "Callum." Seraphine's voice cut through the noise. She had composed herself and was marching down the aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the stone. Her face was a carefully constructed mask of concern, but her eyes were cold. "Give the human to the servants," she said, gesturing dismissively. "You need to tend to your sons. Our sons." Callum scooped the woman up into his arms. She was terrifyingly light, her body limp. He stood up, towering over Seraphine. He looked at his wife, the woman who had ordered coffins, while this stranger was fighting through a blizzard to save his children. "My sons are safe with the healers," Callum growled. His canines lengthened, visible past his lower lip, and his pupils contracted to predatory slits. "But this woman saved the pack's future. If she dies, I will burn this mountain down." He turned his back on Seraphine, on the council, on the empty coffins. He strode toward the infirmary, holding the unconscious stranger against his chest, as if she were the most precious treasure in the world. As he walked, he noticed something. The woman's hand was clutching something tightly, even in her unconscious state. He pried her fingers open gently, carefully. It was a dog collar, not just any collar. It was the GPS tracking collar Grayson had been wearing, the one that should have allowed them to find the boys within minutes of their disappearance. But the collar hadn't fallen off. It had been cut, cleanly, with a blade. Callum's heart hammered against his ribs hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. The collar hadn't fallen off in the struggle. Someone had cut it off. Someone had deliberately removed it to prevent the boys from being found. Grayson and Beckett hadn't just gotten lost. They had been taken. And this human woman, this stranger who had collapsed in his arms, was the only witness. The Thornwood Pack Infirmary was usually a place of sterile silence, but tonight it hummed with chaotic, nervous energy. The best healers in the region were clustered around two beds. One held the twins, who were curled together under a heated thermal blanket, sleeping the deep, exhausted sleep of trauma survivors. Their small chests rose and fell steadily. Their fur had dried to soft fluff. The other bed held the woman. Callum stood in the corner of the room, his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze intense, unwavering, fixed on the stranger. He hadn't moved in 2 hours. He felt like a wire pulled too tight, vibrating with a mixture of relief, confusion, and a terrifying, unfamiliar aggression. Every time Dr. Hale or one of the male nurses touched the woman to check her vitals, adjust her IV line, or take her temperature, Callum had to physically restrain himself from snarling. His wolf was acting irrationally possessive. It wanted to stand over her, guard her, drive away anyone who came near. "Mate." The word kept echoing in his head. Ridiculous. Undeniable. A human. It was unheard of in the Thornwood line. Alphas needed strong she-wolves to produce heirs to lead the hunt, to command respect. A human was a liability. She was fragile. She would age and die while he remained in his prime for decades. And yet, looking at her pale face, the faint freckles across her nose, the way her red hair caught the light, he felt a pull in his chest that was stronger than gravity. The door to the infirmary opened. Rhodes stepped in, holding a tablet. His expression was carefully neutral, but Callum could read the tension in his shoulders. I ran her prints through the system, Rhodes said, closing the door behind him. He crossed the room and handed the tablet to Callum. Callum took it, his eyes scanning the information. Name Brynn Ashford, age 26. Occupation, freelance wildlife photographer. Current address, Seattle, Washington. Current location, rental cabin. Glacier, National Park. Montana 3 weeks. She's been documenting the winter wolf migration. Rhodes continued, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the boys. There's a whole portfolio on her website. Incredible work, actually. She's trying to pitch a story to National Geographic. Callum scrolled through the file. Clean record. No arrests. No ties to hunters. No connections to rival packs. Father was Douglas Ashford, Rhodes said. Park ranger. Died 7 years ago in a rock slide accident in the Cascades. Mother remarried. Looks like Brynn's been estranged from her family since she was 19. Lives alone. No permanent address, just month-to-month rentals, wherever her photography takes her. A photographer, Callum murmured. That explained the gear, the weatherproof jacket, the expensive camera equipment that had been in the pockets of her coat. She has no criminal record, Rhodes said, lowering his voice even further. No ties to hunters, no ties to rival packs. She's clean, Callum. She's just a civilian who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Or the wrong place, Callum said darkly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the severed collar. He held it up for Rhodes to see. Rhodes's eyes widened. He took the collar, examining the clean slice through the thick leather and the GPS transmitter embedded inside. This was cut with a blade, he said quietly. A hunting knife, probably. Silver edge, judging by the burn marks on the leather. My sons didn't get lost, Rhodes. Callum's voice was barely above a whisper, but it was filled with a cold, deadly fury. Someone took them. They cut the tracker. They dumped them in the woods to die. Or they lost them in the storm while trying to transport them, Rhodes said, his face grim. Treason. Rhodes breathed the word like a curse. The color drained from his face. This means someone inside the perimeter let an intruder in, he said. Or worse. Or the threat is already inside the house, Callum finished. He looked back at Brynn. She's not just a savior, Rhodes. She's a witness. She saw something. That's why she was so terrified when she came in. She wasn't just running from the cold. She was running from someone. The door to the infirmary swung open with a sharp crack that made everyone in the room jump. Seraphine walked in, flanked by 2 of her personal guards. She had changed out of her funeral dress into a sharp crimson business suit. Her makeup was flawless. Her eyes were dry. How are they? She asked, walking toward the twins' bed. She reached out a manicured hand to touch Grayson's forehead. The sleeping pup flinched away from her touch even in his sleep. A small whimper escaped his throat. Seraphine retracted her hand quickly, her expression tightening. They're stable, Callum said, stepping between Seraphine and Brynn's bed. His body language was protective, territorial. Hypothermia, malnutrition, but no broken bones, no permanent damage. And the human Seraphine's gaze flicked to Brynn with something that looked dangerously close to disdain. Why is she still here? We should transfer her to a human hospital in the city. We can't have outsiders inside the compound, especially now. It's a security risk. She stays, Callum said. The command was absolute, leaving no room for argument. Callum, be reasonable. Seraphine sighed, feigning patience. She's a human. If she wakes up and sees a shift or realizes what we are, we'll have to wipe her memory anyway. It's better to dump her at the emergency room in town with a fake story about a hiking accident. I can pay off the doctors. Clean, simple. She saved my children when you were measuring them for coffins, Callum snapped. The venom in his voice made both of Seraphine's guards take an involuntary step backward. She stays until I say she leaves, and Rhodes found evidence that the boys were kidnapped. This woman might be the only one who can identify the person who took them. Seraphine froze. For a split second, just a fraction of a moment, genuine fear passed through her eyes, but she masked it instantly with shock. Kidnapped. She placed a hand on her chest, the picture of maternal horror. That's impossible. The perimeter alarms never tripped. The patrols exactly, Callum said, watching her closely, which means someone disabled them. Someone with access. You think, Seraphine's voice dropped to a whisper, you think one of us did this? That's paranoia, Callum. Grief is making you irrational. We'll see, Callum said coldly. At that moment, the heart monitor hooked up to Brynn beeped faster. Her eyelids fluttered. A low moan escaped her lips. She's waking up, Dr. Hale announced, moving to the bedside. Callum was there instantly, dropping to one knee so his face was level with hers. He needed to see her eyes, needed to know she was okay. Brynn, he whispered, testing her name on his tongue. It felt right. Can you hear me? Seraphine stepped closer, her eyes narrowing like a viper preparing to strike. Let's hear what she has to say, Seraphine murmured. If she has anything useful to say at all. Brynn felt like she was swimming through molasses. Her body was heavy, aching in places she didn't know existed. Her fingers and toes burned with a prickling, hot sensation that made her want to crane away, but underneath the physical pain was something else. A memory. A purpose. The pups. The thought jolted her awake like a shock of cold water. Her eyes snapped open wide and panicked. She tried to sit up, but a large, warm hand gently pushed her shoulder back down. Easy, a deep voice rumbled. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate right through her chest, resonating in her bones. You're safe. They're safe. Brynn blinked, her vision clearing slowly. She was staring into the most intense amber eyes she had ever seen. The man hovering over her was devastatingly handsome, but in a dangerous, intimidating way. He looked like he could crush stone with one hand, and yet his touch on her shoulder was incredibly gentle. The, the little ones, Brynn rasped. Her throat was dry as sandpaper, each word painful. The gray one, he was coughing so bad. Is he? Grayson is fine, the man said. He grabbed a cup of water with a straw and brought it to her lips. Drink slowly. Brynn took a sip. The cool liquid soothed her throat. She looked past the man and saw 2 balls of fur sleeping soundly in the next bed over. Tears of relief welled in her eyes. Oh, thank God, she whispered. I thought we weren't going to make it. I saw the lights from the house and I didn't know what else to do. You did good, Brynn, the man said. He knew her name. How did he know her name? I'm Callum. Those are my sons. Brynn looked at him, confusion creasing her forehead. Sons, she said, but they were wolves. I don't understand. I know, Callum said gently, and I'll explain everything, but first I need you to tell me, where did you find them? Brynn closed her eyes, the memories flooding back. The cold, the fear, the crying she'd heard echoing through the ravine. I was taking photos, she said slowly. Near the ridge, about, I don't know, maybe 5 miles east of here, I heard crying. Not like an animal, like children. I went down into the ravine to investigate, and I saw. She trailed off. Her heart rate on the monitor began to spike. Saw what? Callum prompted, his intensity ratcheting up. A man, Brynn said, her voice trembling now. He was dragging them. The pups, he had them in a burlap sack, like he was transporting game. He was moving fast, but he slipped on the ice. Dropped the sack. I hid behind a tree and he didn't see me. Did you see his face? Callum asked. His hand had moved to grip the bedrail, and Brynn heard metal creaking under the pressure. No, Brynn said. He had a ski mask on, black, but he took his glove off for a second to adjust the sack, and I saw his hand. He had a tattoo on his wrist. What kind of tattoo? Rhodes asked from the foot of the bed. Brynn noticed him for the first time, another large, imposing man in tactical gear. A snake, Brynn said, closing her eyes to recall the image more clearly. A black snake eating its own tail. And he smelled weird, like chemicals, gasoline and peppermint. There was a sharp intake of breath from somewhere near the doorway. Brynn opened her eyes and saw a woman standing there, tall, blonde, beautiful in a cold, calculated way. She was staring at Brynn with what could only be described as pure hatred. She's lying, the woman announced loudly. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the room like a knife. Brynn flinched. Excuse me, she said, confused. You're lying, the woman repeated, stepping forward. Her heels clicked aggressively on the tile floor. She turned to address a group of elderly men in gray robes who had begun to gather in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. Don't you see what this is? Seraphine gestured wildly at Brynn. This human woman alone in a blizzard just happens to find 2 alpha pups in a ravine that our best trackers missed. She just happens to carry them 10 miles to our doorstep right in the middle of the funeral. It's a setup. She kidnapped them herself. What? Brynn tried to sit up again, anger overriding her confusion. That's insane. I risked my life for them. Did you? Seraphine spun toward the men in the hallway. She worked with an accomplice. They kidnapped the boys for ransom. But the storm got too bad, or her partner abandoned her, so she brought them back to play the hero and get a reward. She's a grifter. I am not, Brynn's voice cracked. I don't want your money. I don't want anything. I just wanted to help them. Then why were you there? Seraphine snapped, pointing an accusing finger. Who goes hiking in a level 5 blizzard? I told you I'm a photographer. I was documenting. Lies, Seraphine said coldly. She is a danger to this pack. She has seen the pups in their shifted form. She knows too much, and she's clearly the one who cut the tracking collar. Look at her hands. Scratches, probably from struggling with the knife. Brynn looked down at her hands. They were covered in small cuts and scrapes from the thorns and branches she'd pushed through in the forest. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. The elderly men in the hallway murmured amongst themselves, their expressions suspicious. Brynn realized with growing horror that they believed this woman. Arrest her, Seraphine commanded the guards. Lock her in the holding cells until we can properly interrogate her. Two guards stepped forward hesitantly. They looked at Callum, clearly uncertain. Callum stepped in front of Brynn's bed, blocking her from view. His entire posture changed. His shoulders broadened, his canines lengthened, visibly extending past his lower lip. The air in the room grew heavy, thick, charged with something she couldn't name. The temperature seemed to drop. The first person who touches her, Callum said, his voice sounding like grinding boulders, loses their hand. The guards froze. Callum looked at Seraphine, and Brynn saw something in his expression that terrified her. Not anger, something colder, more final. She described a tattoo, Callum said. The Ouroboros. That's the mark of the Viper Syndicate. Rogue wolves for hire. And the scent she described, gasoline and peppermint, that's the exact scent Rhodes found on the perimeter fence 3 days ago when we were searching. He turned to the men in gray robes. She is not the villain here, he said, his voice ringing with authority. She is under my protection. Protection, Seraphine scoffed, though Brynn could see fear creeping into her eyes now. On what grounds she's a human trespasser? Callum looked back at Brynn. She was small, frightened, completely confused by the mention of rogue wolves and syndicates. But she was looking at him with trust. Despite everything, despite not understanding what was happening, she trusted him. The connection between them pulsed undeniable, washing away every hesitation. He knew in that moment that he had to claim her, had to give her a status that even the council couldn't override. Or the politics of the pack would kill her before sunrise. He turned back to the room. His voice rang out with absolute finality. On the grounds, Callum declared, that she is my mate. The silence that followed was deafening. Seraphine's mouth dropped open. The elders gasped, and Brynn just stared at him, blinking in utter confusion. You're what? She whispered. Get out, Callum roared at the room. The command reverberated off the stone walls, rattling the ancient windows in their frames. Everyone out, except the doctor. Now. The room scrambled to empty. Guards backed out. Elders retreated. As the crowd cleared, Seraphine lingered for one long second at the door. Her eyes met Callum's across the room. There was no more pretense of grief or concern on her face, only cold, calculating fury. You've made a mistake, Callum, she hissed. The pack will never accept a human Luna. You've just signed your own death warrant. She turned on her heel and slammed the door behind her. The sound echoed through the infirmary like a gunshot. Callum turned back to Brynn, his expression fierce, the wolf barely contained beneath his human skin. I think, Brynn said, her voice shaking, you have a lot of explaining to do. Starting with what the hell is a mate, and why did you just grow fangs? The silence in the infirmary after the door slammed was heavy, filled with the rhythmic hum of medical equipment and the frantic beating of Brynn's heart. She pulled the hospital blanket up to her chin, her eyes darting between Callum and the door where that angry blonde woman had just exited. You called me your mate, Brynn said, her voice steadying, though her hands still trembled beneath the blanket. And you growled, and your eyes were, I need you to tell me exactly what kind of situation I've walked into here, or I am getting up and walking out that door right now. Frostbite be damned. Callum pulled the chair close with deliberate care, giving her space to process. He moved slowly, carefully. He looked exhausted. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, revealing the toll of the last few days etched into every line of his face. It's not a cult, Brynn, he said quietly. It's biology, just not the biology you learned in school. He nodded toward the other bed where the two small forms were sleeping. Watch, Brynn looked. The wolf pups were stirring, shifting in their sleep. As she watched, their forms seemed to blur like a heat mirage on a summer highway. There was a soft sound like joints popping, like fabric stretching. The fur receded, the snouts shortened, limbs elongated. Within 10 seconds, two small boys with dark hair lay in the bed wearing nothing but the thermal blankets that had been draped over them. Brynn's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. They're shapeshifters, she breathed. Werewolves, Callum corrected gently. And so am I. We are the Thornwood pack. I'm the alpha, the leader. Those are my sons, Grayson and Beckett. Brynn stared at him, her scientific mind racing to process the impossible. Part of her wanted to laugh. to write this off as a hallucination brought on by hypothermia. But she had seen it. She had carried those pups for hours, had felt their warmth, heard their whimpers, watched them shift between forms. And the mate thing, she asked, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. It means you are the other half of my soul. Callum's voice dropped to a husky register that sent involuntary shivers down Brynn's spine despite the warm blankets. Wolves have one true partner, one person the universe created specifically for them. It's rare to find them, even rarer for a human to be paired with a wolf. But the moon goddess makes no mistakes. You saved my pups because the bond pulled you to them. You felt it, didn't you? In the woods. Brynn thought back to the storm, the strange, inexplicable tug in her gut that had told her to turn left at the fork in the trail instead of right, even though right would have taken her back to her cabin. The surge of strength that had allowed her to carry 80 pounds of weight through waist-deep snow for miles without collapsing. The absolute certainty that she couldn't leave those pups behind, even though the logical part of her brain had screamed that she was going to die out there. I felt something, she admitted. But this is insane. I have a life in Saddle. I have a lease on an apartment. I have a cat named Hazel who's probably destroying my friend's furniture right now. I can't just be, what did that woman call it, Luna? I can't be queen to a werewolf kingdom. Luna, Callum corrected, and despite everything, there was a ghost of a smile touching his lips. And I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm asking you to stay alive. Seraphine is dangerous, Brynn. She was my arranged partner, not my mate. The marriage was political, designed to unite two powerful families. But she craves power above all else. Now that you're here, now that the boys are alive, her position is threatened. She will try to kill you. Brynn's blood ran cold. The way that woman had looked at her, pure hatred, calculation, like she was a problem to be eliminated. Great, Brynn said weakly. So I saved 2 kids and now I'm a murder target. This is going fantastic. I won't let her touch you, Callum vowed. He reached out, covering her hand with his. The contact sent that same electric jolt through her system, but this time it was warm, soothing. It eased the lingering chill in her bones. I swear it on my life, on my son's lives. You are under my protection now. Before Brynn could respond, the door opened. Rhodes entered looking grim. He held a plastic evidence bag containing a blackened, twisted piece of metal. Alpha, Rhodes said, his eyes flicking briefly to Brynn before focusing on Callum. We swept the ravine where Brynn found the boys. We found a snowmobile buried under a snowdrift. It had been torched, burned down to the frame to destroy evidence. But the engine block's serial number survived. Well, Callum stood up, his entire demeanor shifting from gentle protector to commanding Alpha in an instant. And, he demanded, it's registered to a shell company, Rhodes had said. The purchase order was signed by a proxy, a man named Silas Kane. Callum's hands clenched into fists. The Serpent of the South. He's a mercenary broker, Rhodes explained, glancing at Brynn. Connects people who want crimes committed with people willing to commit them. For the right price. There's more, Rhodes continued. He pulled out a second evidence bag, this one containing a crushed cell phone. We found this near the wreckage. The phone was destroyed, but the SIM card was intact. There was one outgoing text message sent 3 hours before the storm hit. He pulled up an image on his tablet, showing it to Callum. Brynn couldn't see it from her bed, but she saw Callum's face go very, very still. Package secured, Rhodes read aloud. Eliminating tracker. Transfer second half of payment. Who received the text? Callum asked. His voice was deadly calm now, which somehow seemed more frightening than when he'd been shouting. It was sent to a secure server, Rhodes said carefully, but we traced the IP address of the device that logged in to check the message. Callum waited. The IP traces back to the estate's internal Wi-Fi network, Rhodes said quietly, specifically to the router in the West Wing guest suite. Callum's jaw tightened until Brynn could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Lucian Vale, he growled. Seraphine's brother. He's been staying in the West Wing since the wedding. Lucian is weak, Rhodes said. A gambler. He owes money to half the underground wolf casinos on the eastern seaboard. Last I heard, his debts were upward of $300,000. Perfect middleman, Callum said bitterly. Seraphine keeps her hands clean, uses her desperate brother to hire the mercenary. Brynn sat up straighter in bed, anger cutting through her exhaustion. Wait, she said, let me get this straight. Your wife hired a hitman to kidnap and murder your 4-year-old son so she could, what, take overseas power. Callum turned to face her. The pain in his eyes was raw, unguarded. If the heirs die and I produce no other children, the line of succession becomes unstable, he explained. The council would call a vote of no confidence. Seraphine's family would push to install a puppet alpha, someone they could control, and Seraphine would effectively rule through them. That's not ambition, Brynn said, her voice shaking with fury. That's evil. That's psychotic. Forget the werewolf thing. That's just pure calculating evil. We have the connection to her brother, Rhodes had said, but it's circumstantial. If we accuse a council member's family without hard proof, without someone willing to testify, it'll split the pack. Could start a civil war. Both men turned to look at Brynn. The weight of their stares made her understand. The tattoo, Brynn said slowly. I saw it, the snake eating its tail, on the man's wrist. Silas Kane's top enforcer carries that mark, Callum said, moving back to her bedside. His name is Kyle Draven. He's a mercenary. Former military, dishonorably discharged for war crimes. If we can find Kyle and you can identify him, we can force him to testify. And if he testifies, we have them. Find him, Brynn asked. He's probably halfway to Mexico by now. No, Callum said, walking to the window. He pulled back the curtain, revealing the blizzard that was still raging outside. Snow pounded against the glass like white fury. The storm has locked down the entire mountain range. The roads are impassable. No planes can fly in this. If he torched his snowmobile, he's on foot. He's trapped in the valley. He turned back to her, his gaze intense, unwavering. And we're going to hunt him down. The hunt lasted 12 brutal hours. While Brynn recovered in the high-security medical wing of the mansion guarded by Rhodes and 4 of Callum's most loyal warriors, the Thornwood pack mobilized. 50 wolves in their animal forms spread out across the territory, moving in coordinated search patterns. They had thermal imaging drones flying overhead despite the storm. They had trackers who could follow a scent trail through running water. Kyle Draven was good. Former special forces trained in evasion and survival. He'd buried himself in a hunter's blind 4 miles east of the estate, camouflaged with pine branches and packed snow. He'd wrapped himself in thermal blankets to hide his heat signature. It took 3 warriors to bring him down. He didn't surrender quietly. He had a silver knife which could kill a werewolf with a single cut, and he knew how to use it. A young warrior named Liam took the blade to the throat before Kyle was finally subdued, tackled by 2 more wolves and bound with silver chains that burned his wrists. By dawn, Kyle Draven was in the dungeon cells beneath the Thornwood estate, locked behind iron bars reinforced with silver, and Liam was being buried in the pack cemetery. But the victory was short-lived. The next morning, the Great Hall had been transformed. The coffins were gone. In their place stood a long, curved table where 12 elderly figures sat in gray ceremonial robes. This was the High Council, the governing body that even an alpha had to respect. They were judges, lawmakers, and the keepers of wolf tradition going back centuries. Seraphine stood in the center of the room, and overnight she had spun an entirely new narrative. She looked like a tragic queen in her black Dior dress, her hair pulled back, her makeup subtle but perfect. She had the ear of at least half the council. The Vale family had money, influence, and generations of political connections. Callum walked into the hall dressed in a sharp black suit, his hand gripping Brynn's firmly. Brynn wore a simple navy dress that one of the staff had found for her. It was too big in some places, too tight in others, but it was clean and appropriate. She felt small in the cavernous room, surrounded by hundreds of people who were all staring at her like she was a zoo animal or a threat. Alpha Callum Thornwood, Elder Thomas rumbled from the center of the council table. His voice echoed in the stone chamber. We are convened to address the grave accusations brought forward by Lady Seraphine Vale. Accusations? Callum's voice was sharp as broken glass. He guided Brynn to a seat near the front of the room, then remained standing. I am the one with a prisoner in the dungeon. I am the one there with evidence of conspiracy and attempted murder. What accusations does she have? So you claim, Seraphine's voice cut through the hall, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. But let us examine the facts, shall we? You bring a human woman into our sanctuary violating centuries of secrecy laws. You claim she is your mate, which is a very convenient excuse to bypass the council's authority on matters of pack security. You claim she found the pups, yet she is a complete stranger with no ties to these lands, no reason to be here except the stories she tells. And now you produce a mercenary who conveniently confirms everything you want us to believe. She turned to face the council, playing to her audience. I submit to you that Callum Thornwood is compromised. His grief over the loss of his sons, his rage at the failed search, has made him vulnerable to manipulation. This woman is a spy. She works for human hunters who want to expose our existence. She staged the entire kidnapping to infiltrate our pack, and Callum is too blinded by this false mate bond to see it. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled pack members. Brynn felt her stomach drop. Seraphine was good. She played on their fears, their prejudices, their inherent distrust of humans. "Bring in the prisoner," Callum commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Let him speak for himself." The doors at the back of the hall opened. Two guards dragged Kyle Draven in. He was a big man, heavily muscled, but he looked rough. His face was battered and bruised from his capture. His hands were cuffed behind his back and with silver chains that left angry red burns on his wrists. He looked around the room with cold, calculating eyes that showed no fear, only contempt. For just a second, his eyes landed on Seraphine. She was standing 20 feet away from him, her face the picture of composed concern. But Brynn saw something pass between them. A look, recognition. And then Seraphine gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Brynn's heart sank. She knew what was coming. "State your name," Elder Thomas commanded. "Kyle Draven," the man said. His voice was rough, damaged, probably from shouting during his capture. "Who hired you to kidnap the Thornwood heirs?" Callum demanded, stepping forward. Kyle grinned. His teeth were stained with blood from a split lip. "The human hired me," he said, turning his head to stare directly at Brynn. The room exploded into chaos. "What?" Brynn jumped to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "That's a lie." "She contacted me 3 weeks ago," Kyle said, his voice carrying over the noise. He'd clearly rehearsed this. "Met me in a bar in Seattle. Said she wanted to steal 2 wolf pups to sell to a private exotic animal collector. Offered me $10,000 up front, another 10 when the job was done." "That's not true," Brynn shouted. "I've never seen this man before in my life." "The storm hit harder than we expected," Kyle continued, ignoring her. "She panicked, couldn't get the pups out of the territory, so she decided to play the hero instead. Bring them back, getting good with the pack, maybe get a reward. She's a con artist." "Liar!" Callum roared. The sound shook the room. His control was slipping. Brynn could see his canines beginning to lengthen. "Who paid you to say this?" "Check her bank accounts," Seraphine said smugly from across the room. "I'm quite certain you'll find a withdrawal of $10,000 from 3 weeks ago." Brynn felt the trap snapping shut around her. They had planted evidence. They had paid Kyle off or threatened him or both to frame her. And from the looks on the council members' faces, it was working. "This is a setup," Callum snarled. "The pups. Ask the pups. They know her scent. They know she saved them." "The pups are 4 years old and traumatized," Seraphine said dismissively. "Children are easily confused, especially after an ordeal like this. Their testimony is unreliable." Elder Thomas stood up slowly, his ancient bones creaking. "We have conflicting testimonies," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of judgment. "We have a human intruder and a mercenary, each accusing the other. Until the truth can be properly determined through investigation, the human must be detained for the safety of the pack." He turned his gaze to Callum. "And you, Alpha Thornwood, until you are cleared of the suspicion of collusion with a potential spy, your Alpha authority is hereby suspended." "You cannot suspend me," Callum said. His voice was low, dangerous. "I am the blood of Thornwood. I am the rightful Alpha. And I am the voice of this council," Thomas said sternly. "Guards, take the human to the holding cells." "No," the word came out as a growl. Callum's body began to change. His clothes ripped at the seams as black fur exploded from his skin. His spine curved and extended. His face elongated into a muzzle filled with teeth designed to tear through flesh and bone. Within seconds, a massive wolf stood in the center of the hall. He was easily 10 feet tall at the shoulder, a creature of pure muscle and predatory power. He stood over Brynn, who had stumbled backward in shock, his massive body forming a living wall between her and the guards. The snarl that came from his throat was a sound from nightmares. No one moved. No one wanted to fight an Alpha in this state. "Callum, stop," Brynn's voice cut through the tension. She grabbed a handful of the thick fur on his flank, feeling the muscles bunch tight beneath. "If you fight them, you prove her right," Brynn said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. Her voice shook, but she forced steel into it. "You prove you're out of control. You prove you're compromised." The massive wolf looked down at her. His amber eyes were glowing with an inner fire, but she could see the man inside the beast. The father who was terrified of losing everything. Again. "I will go," Brynn said, addressing the council now. "I will go to the cell because I am innocent. I have nothing to hide, and when you find the truth, and you will find it, you are all going to owe me one hell of an apology." She turned to look at Seraphine. The woman's smile was triumphant cold. "And you," Brynn said, pointing directly at her, "you better hope they lock me up tight, Because if I get out, I'm coming for you." The wolf let out a sound that was half whine, half howl. It was the sound of a heart breaking. But he didn't attack. Slowly, painfully, he shifted back to human form. Callum stood there naked from the waist up where his shirt had torn away, his chest heaving with the effort of maintaining control. He looked at Rhodes. "Stay with her," Callum commanded. "Guard her cell. If anyone, and I mean anyone, tries to enter without my explicit permission, you kill them." "Understood." Rhodes nodded sharply. "Yes, Alpha." Brynn was led away by two guards who looked deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. As the heavy doors of the hall closed behind her, she saw Seraphine's face. The woman was smiling, a victory smile, but Brynn also noticed something else. Seraphine's hand was trembling. She was scared. The cells beneath Thornwood Manor were cold and damp, carved from the same stone as the mountain itself. They were old, built centuries ago, when werewolf justice was swift and brutal. The cell they put Brynn in was bare except for a metal cot with a thin mattress and a scratchy wool blanket. There was a bucket in the corner for a toilet. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows. Rhodes stood outside the bars, a rifle slung across his chest. He hadn't spoken since they descended the stone stairs. His face was carefully neutral, but Brynn could see the tension in his shoulders. "You shouldn't be here," Rhodes said quietly after several minutes of silence. "You don't deserve this." Brynn wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and sat on the cot. The metal was ice cold against her legs. "I've had worse weekends," she said, trying for humor. "Usually they involve bad dates and too much wine, not werewolf trials and murder accusations." Rhodes almost smiled. Almost. Hours passed. Brynn dozed fitfully, her body still recovering from the hypothermia and exhaustion. She woke when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Multiple sets. Heavy boots. Rhodes tensed his hand, moving to his rifle. "Who goes there?" he called out. No answer. Then the lights went out. The entire corridor plunged into absolute darkness. "Stay down," Rhodes hissed. Brynn heard the sound of silenced gunfire. Soft puffs, almost gentle. Rhodes grunted and fell heavily against the bars of her cell. She heard his body slide down to the floor. "Rhodes!" Brynn screamed. A figure emerged from the shadows. Brynn couldn't see details, but she could make out the shape. Someone dressed in all black, wearing night vision goggles. Moving with military precision, in one hand a syringe, in the other a set of lockpicks. The cell door clicked open. The figure stepped inside. Brynn backed into the corner of the cell, her hands searching desperately for anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around the metal bucket. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Nothing personal," a male voice said from behind the goggles. "Lady Seraphine sends her regards." He lunged forward. Brynn swung the bucket with all her strength, but he was faster. He caught her wrist easily, his grip like iron. He pinned her against the wall, the syringe moving toward her neck. Whatever was in that needle, Brynn knew with absolute certainty it wasn't going to put her to sleep. It was going to stop her heart. Then the cell exploded. Not literally, but the stone wall at the back of the cell crumbled inward, as if it had been hit by a wrecking ball. Dust and debris filled the air, choking and blinding. Through the hole in the wall, a pair of glowing amber eyes pierced the darkness. Callum hadn't waited for lawyers or council approval or due process. He had torn through the foundation of his own home to get to her. He was in a half-shifted form, something between man and wolf. His body was humanoid but covered in dark fur. His hands had elongated into claws. His face was partially transformed, his jaw extended, filled with fangs. He looked like something from ancient mythology. A monster. A god of vengeance. The assassin turned terrified, but he was too slow. Callum grabbed him by the head with one massive clawed hand. "You touched her," Callum snarled. His voice was distorted, barely human. He threw the assassin against the opposite wall with such force that Brynn heard bones breaking. The man crumpled and didn't get up. Callum turned to Brynn, and for a second she felt genuine fear. He was covered in stone dust and blood. He looked like a nightmare given flesh. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was still that grinding, inhuman growl, but there was desperate concern in it. "I'm fine," Brynn breathed, dropping the bucket. It clattered loudly on the stone floor. "Rhodes, he was shot." "He's wearing a vest," Callum said, glancing at the groaning figure outside the cell. "He'll live." He scooped Brynn up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all, stepping over the rubble. The night air hit them cold and sharp. They were outside the compound now, having come through the dungeon wall that bordered the forest. "Where are we going?" Brynn asked. "To hell with the council," Callum growled. "We're going to war." He didn't run far. Running was an admission of guilt, and Callum Thornwood had nothing to be guilty for. Instead, he circled around to the armory, a reinforced concrete bunker near the motor pool. Rhodes staggered in 10 minutes later, holding his ribs where the bullets had impacted his Kevlar vest. He'd have spectacular bruises, but nothing was broken. Inside the armory, Callum armed himself. But he didn't reach for guns or modern weapons. He reached for something mounted on the wall in a place of honor, the Sword of Thornwood. An ancient blade silver-edged with a leather-wrapped grip worn smooth by centuries of hands. It hadn't been drawn in combat in over 100 years. "You can't go back in there," Brynn said, her voice shaking. "They'll kill you on sight. They think you're a traitor." Callum turned to face her. He had shifted back to fully human form now, though his expression fierce the wolf barely contained beneath his human skin. He wiped a smudge of stone dust from her cheek with surprising gentleness. "They think I am weak," he said quietly. "They think I will follow the rules of a council that has been corrupted and bought. Tonight I remind them what it means to be alpha. I am not just a politician, and I am not just a leader, I am the wolf." He looked at Rhodes. "Is the assassin alive?" "Barely," Rhodes said, his hand pressed to his side. "Concussed, couple broken ribs, but he'll wake up." "Good," Callum said. "Tie him to a stretcher. We're bringing him to the Great Hall." "And the evidence?" Rhodes asked. Callum pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, a bank transfer record that Rhodes had pulled from the estate's financial server during the chaos. "Seraphine got sloppy," Callum said. "She wired the payment from her brother Lucian's account to an offshore LLC. The transaction was flagged by our financial security just an hour ago, and we caught Lucian trying to run. He's in custody at the front gate." Brynn stared at him. "So we have proof," she said. "We have proof," Callum confirmed. "But more than that, we have something Seraphine can't explain away." He looked at Brynn intently. "My sons, Grayson and Beckett, they're old enough to testify telepathically. In wolf law, children over the age of 3 can submit testimony through a mind link with the council. It's irrefutable. They cannot lie in that state." "But that's traumatic," Brynn said, thinking of those 2 small boys, making them relive that. "It is," Callum agreed, his jaw tightened, "and I would never force them. But if they're willing, if they choose to tell what they saw, Seraphine has no defense." 20 minutes later, they were in the medical wing. Grayson and Beckett were awake, sitting up in their beds in human form. They were small for 4-year-olds with dark hair and those same amber eyes as their father. When they saw Brynn, both of them smiled. "Brynn!" Grayson shouted, his face lighting up. "Hi, Brynn," Beckett said softly. Brynn felt her heart melt. She crossed to their bed and knelt down so she was at eye level with them. "Hi, boys," she said softly. "Papa," Grayson said, looking at Callum. "Is Brynn going to stay with us?" "I hope so," Callum said. "But first I need to ask you both to be very brave. Can you do that?" The twins looked at each other, that silent communication that twins have. "What do we have to do?" Beckett asked. "I need you to tell the council what happened," Callum said gently. "What you saw the night before the bad man took you." Grayson's face became serious. Beckett's eyes widened slightly. "We have to tell about Mama," Grayson asked. Callum's expression tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, about what Mama did." "She was bad," Beckett said simply. "She scared us." "I know," Callum said, "and I'm sorry you have to remember that. But if you can tell the council what you saw, we can make sure she never scares anyone again." "Will you be there?" Grayson asked. "Yes." "Will Brynn be there?" Beckett asked. Brynn reached out and took both boys' hands. "I'll be right next to you the whole time," she promised. "I won't leave you." The boys looked at each other again. Then together they nodded. "Okay, Papa," Grayson said. "We'll tell." The Great Hall had never seen anything like this. The council was still in session, elders seated at their long curved table, when the main doors didn't open. Instead, a voice rang out from the balcony above, echoing off the ancient stone walls like the voice of judgment itself. "Is that so?" Every head in the hall snapped upward. There, standing on the high railing, 30 feet above the floor, was Callum Thornwood. He was shirtless, covered in gray stone dust and dried blood. The sword of Thornwood gleamed in his hand, catching the light from the chandeliers. Behind him stood Rhodes, battered but upright, and half a dozen loyal warriors. And beside them, holding the hands of 2 small boys, was Brynn. "He's here!" Seraphine shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "Guards, seize him! Stand down!" Callum's voice hit the room like a physical force. It was the alpha tone, that primal frequency that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the wolf hindbrain. The guards who had been moving forward froze mid-step. Their weapons clattered to the floor as their hands went slack. Their wolves recognized the command of a true alpha and would not allow them to disobey. Callum didn't hesitate. He leaped from the balcony. It was a 30-foot drop to the stone floor below, a fall that would shatter human bones. But Callum landed in the center aisle with a heavy thud that cracked the stone beneath his boots. He rose slowly, the sword held loosely at his side, his eyes blazing with that supernatural amber glow. Behind him, the main doors blew open. Rhodes walked in, dragging a stretcher. On it was the assassin, groaning and bound with silver chains. And walking beside Rhodes, her head held high, despite her fear, was Brynn. Grayson and Beckett clutched her hands, one on each side. "You wanted evidence?" Callum roared, his voice reverberating off the stone walls. "Here is your evidence." He strode to the center of the hall and grabbed the assassin by the collar, hauling him upright with one hand. The man's feet dangled above the floor. "Tell them," Callum commanded. "Tell them who sent you to kill her." The assassin's eyes darted between Callum's glowing gaze and Seraphine's pale face across the room. He was terrified, trapped between two different kinds of death. "It was her," he gasped, pointing a shaking finger at Seraphine. "Lady Seraphine. She paid me half up front, half when the human was dead. She gave me the layout of the dungeons, the access codes, everything." The room erupted in gasps and angry mutters. The pack members, who had been standing in silent observation, began to shift restlessly, growling low in their throats. "Lies!" Seraphine screamed, backing toward the altar. "He's been tortured." Callum beat that confession out of him. "Well, sire, did I?" Callum dropped the assassin, who crumpled to the floor. He pulled the bank transfer record from his pocket and held it high. "Did I also force you to wire $175,000 from your brother's account to an offshore company? This transfer was flagged 10 minutes ago by our financial security team. Lucian tried to run. We caught him at the front gate." The color drained from Seraphine's face. She looked around the room wildly, seeing the expressions of the elders changing from sympathy to suspicion to outright hostility. The pack warriors were moving forward, surrounding her position. She was cornered, and she knew it. "You fools," she spat, her mask dropping completely. Her beautiful face twisted into something ugly, hateful. "I did it for the pack. Can't you see Callum is weak? He's obsessed with sentiment, with playing the loving father. And now he brings a human into our bed. He's polluting our bloodline." She reached into her jacket. For a moment, Brynn thought she was pulling a gun. But it was worse than that. It was a glass vial no bigger than a pill bottle filled with silvery liquid. Silver nitrate. Liquid poison to a werewolf. Fatal on contact. "If I can't have this pack," Seraphine screamed, her voice shrill with rage and desperation, "then no one will." She drew back her arm and threw the vial with all her strength. But she didn't throw it at Callum. She threw it at Grayson and Beckett. Time seemed to slow down. Brynn watched the vial arc through the air, tumbling end over end, heading directly toward the two small boys who stood 15 feet away. Callum was too far to intercept. He was on the wrong side of the room, 20 feet away at least. Rhodes was blocked by the crowd of pack members. The warriors were too far back. No one could reach them in time. No one except Brynn. She didn't think, didn't calculate the odds or consider the danger. She just moved. She released the boy's hands and sprinted forward. Her legs, still weak from hypothermia and exhaustion, somehow found the strength. She dove through the air, her arms spread wide, her body forming a shield. The vial shattered against her back. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent hall. Glass exploded. Liquid splashed across her shoulders and neck. "Brynn!" Callum's roar shook the foundations of the manor. It was a sound of pure anguish of a mate watching his bond partner die. Brynn hit the floor hard, her body covering Grayson and Beckett. She waited for the burning, waited for the poison to eat through her skin, to dissolve her flesh, to stop her heart. But nothing happened. She felt the liquid soaking through her navy dress. It was warm, almost hot. Her dress began to smoke where the silver nitrate touched it, the fabric dissolving like tissue paper in acid. But underneath, where the liquid touched her skin, there was nothing. No burning, no pain, just wetness. Because she was human. Silver nitrate was poison to werewolves, designed to react with the supernatural enzymes in their blood and flesh. But to a human, it was just a caustic chemical. Dangerous, yes, but not instantly fatal. Not like it would have been to Grayson and Beckett, whose young bodies would have dissolved in seconds. Absolute stunned silence filled the hall. Brynn pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, checking the boys beneath her. "Are you okay?" she gasped. "Did any of it touch you?" "No," Grayson whispered, his eyes wide with shock. "You saved us." "You saved us again," Beckett added, his small voice trembling. Brynn looked up. 300 wolves were staring at her in complete shock. She was kneeling on the stone floor in a smoking, dissolving dress, her back red and irritated from the chemical burn, but otherwise unharmed. She had taken a hit that would have killed the Alpha heirs instantly. And she was fine. Across the room, Seraphine stood frozen, her hands still outstretched from the throw. She was staring at Brynn with an expression of absolute disbelief. Her plan had failed. Her final gambit had backfired spectacularly. Callum turned to face his wife. He didn't shout, didn't roar. He went deadly, terrifyingly quiet. "You attacked my mate," he whispered. Each word was precise, controlled, more frightening than any scream. "You tried to murder my children." He dropped the sword of Thornwood. The ancient blade clattered to the floor. He didn't need it. His body began to change. But this time it wasn't the controlled shift he'd done before. This was violent, instantaneous, primal. The great black wolf exploded from his human form in a burst of fur and fury. He was massive, 12 feet tall at the shoulder, a beast of shadow and rage that seemed to fill the entire hall. He lunged. Seraphine tried to shift her body, beginning to ripple and change, but she was too slow, too panicked. Callum hit her like a freight train, pinning her to the ground. His jaws snapped inches from her throat, strings of saliva dripping onto her terrified face. One bite would end her. One flex of those powerful jaws would crush her windpipe and sever her spine. "Yield," Rhodes shouted, stepping forward. "Alpha, let the council judge her. Don't stain your soul with her blood." The great wolf panted, his breath hot and rank. Every instinct, every fiber of his being demanded vengeance. Demanded blood for blood, justice for the attempted murder of his children and his mate. Then he heard a sound. Callum, Brynn's voice, soft, steady, soft. She was standing up now, the boys clinging to her legs. Her ruined dress hung in tatters, but she stood tall. She held out one hand toward him. "Don't," she said gently. "She's not worth it. Look at your sons. They need their father, not a killer. They need you." The red haze in Callum's vision began to clear. He looked past Seraphine's terrified face to Brynn. She was disheveled, her clothes ruined, smelling of chemicals and fear. But she was looking at him with total acceptance. No fear of the monster, no revulsion at the beast, just calm, steady trust. The wolf huffed a sound like a steam engine. He stepped back, releasing Seraphine. Guards rushed in, immediately, real guards this time, loyal to the Alpha and the law. They shackled Seraphine with silver chains that made her scream as they touched her skin. They dragged her to her feet, and she fought every step, cursing and shrieking. "You'll regret this," she screamed as they hauled her toward the doors. "All of you, the human Luna, will destroy you. Your children will be weak, half-breeds, abominations." But no one was listening anymore. Callum shifted back to human form. He was naked from the waist up, his clothes destroyed in the transformation, but he didn't care. He walked across the hall to Brynn, and the entire pack watched. This was the moment, the test, the point where pack law and tradition would either bend or break. Callum fell to his knees in front of Brynn. He lowered his head, exposing the back of his neck. It was the ultimate sign of submission and trust in wolf culture, the place where a killing bite would land. An alpha never exposed his throat, never showed vulnerability, unless he was kneeling before his Luna. "Twice now you've saved my sons." Callum choked out, his voice raw with emotion. He grasped Brynn's hands in his, holding them like they were precious treasures. "You are the bravest soul I have ever known." Elder Thomas rose slowly from his seat at the council table. He was ancient, his bones creaking, but his eyes were clear and sharp. He looked at Brynn, then at the two boys clinging to her, then at the Alpha kneeling before her. "The moon goddess works in mysterious ways," the elder said, his voice trembling with emotion. "She brought us a stranger from the storm. A human, yes, but with the heart of a wolf." He stepped down from the platform and approached Brynn. Then this man who had led the council for 50 years, who had seen alphas rise and fall, bowed low. "Hail Luna Brynn," he said. The response was immediate, one by one, like a wave spreading across the hall. Every pack member dropped to one knee, warriors in their tactical gear, servants in their uniforms, council members in their gray robes. 300 wolves bowing to a small, red-haired photographer from Seattle who had walked through a blizzard to save 2 children. Brynn looked around, wide-eyed, overwhelmed. Her hands tightened on Grayson and Beckett's shoulders. She started, then stopped, cleared her throat. "I really just want a hot shower." Callum laughed. It was a rough, watery sound, half sob and half joy. He stood up and pulled her into a crushing kiss, right there in front of everyone. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "You can have anything you want," he promised. "Anything, forever." 3 days later, the Great Hall was transformed once more. This time it was a courtroom, a tribunal. The full pack was present, over 300 wolves standing witness. This wasn't just about Seraphine anymore. This was about justice, about setting a precedent, about showing that no one, no matter how powerful their family or how deep their connections was above pack law. Seraphine and Lucian Vale knelt in the center of the hall bound in silver chains. Seraphine looked defiant, still her platinum hair perfect despite 3 days in the dungeons. Lucian looked like he'd aged 10 years. He was broken, trembling, crying. Elder Thomas read the charges in a voice that echoed off the stone walls. Seraphine Vale, you are charged with conspiracy to commit murder against the Alpha heirs Grayson and Beckett Thornwood. You are charged with hiring mercenaries from the Viper Syndicate. You are charged with attempted murder of Luna Brynn Ashford. You are charged with high treason against the Thornwood pack. He turned to Lucian. Lucian Vale, you are charged as accessory to conspiracy money laundering and aiding rogue wolves. The evidence was presented methodically. The cut tracking collar, the torched snowmobile with its traced serial number, the burner phone with its damning text message, the bank transfer records. Kyle Draven's full confession given in exchange for exile instead of execution. Brynn's eyewitness testimony of the kidnapping, and then the moment everyone had been waiting for. Elder Thomas placed his gnarled hands gently on Grayson and Beckett's heads. The boys stood bravely, though Brynn could see them trembling slightly. She knelt beside them, one hand on each boy's back, giving them strength. The council will now receive testimony, Thomas said solemnly. The telepathic link opened. It was like a channel broadcasting directly into the minds of every council member. They saw through the boys' eyes, felt their fear, experienced their memories as if they were their own. The vision flooded through them. A garden at night, two small boys unable to sleep looking for their father, hiding behind a hedge when they saw their mother instead. Seraphine, beautiful and cold in the moonlight, standing with her brother Lucian, a masked man in black beside them. A bag changing hands heavy with gold coins, and Seraphine's voice crystal clear. Make it look like the nanny's fault. No one can trace it back to us. The river will take care of the bodies. The masked man asking, and if they're found? Seraphine's laugh cruel and sharp. They won't be, not in time. The council members reeled back from the vision, some crying, some shaking with rage. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. Children could not lie through a telepathic bond. The moon goddess herself was witness. Elder Thomas's hands shook as he removed them from the boys' heads. The children do not lie, he said, his voice breaking. The testimony is irrefutable. He looked at Seraphine with something close to pity. Have you anything to say in your defense? Seraphine was given one last chance to speak. She stood as much as the chains would allow, and she laughed. Defense, she said. I don't need a defense. I did what needed to be done. Callum Thornwood is weak. Sentiment over strength. Love over power. He's making this pack soft, vulnerable, and now a human. You think this is acceptable? You think the other packs won't see this as weakness to exploit? She looked directly at Brynn. You're a placeholder, Seraphine hissed. A novelty. You'll age and wither while he stays young. You'll die, and he'll have wasted his prime years on a mortal. And if you somehow manage to produce children, they'll be abominations. Half-breeds too weak to lead. Brynn stood up from beside the boys. She walked forward until she was face to face with Seraphine. I don't need to prove anything to you, Brynn said calmly. I've already proven everything to them. She gestured to the packed hall. You tried to murder children, 4-year-old boys, your own sons. There is no redemption for that, no justification. You're not a visionary or a pragmatist. You're just evil. Seraphine's face twisted with rage, but before she could respond, Elder Thomas spoke. Seraphine Vale, you are found guilty on all charges. The sentence is death. The pack howled. 300 voices raised in a sound that was part grief, part rage, part satisfaction. Justice was being served. Lucian broke down completely sobbing. I'm sorry, he wailed. Please, mercy. I was in debt. The Red Fang Casino, they were going to kill me. Seraphine said she'd pay it off if I helped. I didn't know she was going to murder children. I swear I didn't know. Ignorance is not innocence, Elder Thomas said coldly. But you did not strike the blow yourself. Lucian Vale, you are hereby exiled. You have 24 hours to leave Thornwood territory. If you return, you will be executed on sight. Your family name is stripped. You are Omega. Packless. The doors slammed behind him. Through the windows, the pack watched as Lucian was escorted to the territorial border, stripped of his Vale family ring, his belongings thrown into the snow. The guards cut the silver cuffs, and he stumbled forward into the wilderness beyond Thornwood land. He turned back once, his face a mask of regret and terror. No pack, no bonds, no protection. In the world of wolves, he was a ghost. Elder Thomas's voice was quiet but firm. Let his fate serve as warning. Treason against the pack is treason against family, and family is all we have. Now there was only Seraphine. The execution method was called mercury justice, reserved for treason. A silver injection, liquid silver dissolved in mercury, injected directly into the bloodstream. It was agonizing but swift. Dr. Hale prepared the syringe with steady professional hands. The execution would take place in the courtyard with the full pack as witnesses. This was tradition. This was pack law. But before they could move, Seraphine Callum looked at Brynn. As Luna, he said quietly, you have the right of pardon. One word from you and I can commute her sentence to exile. The entire hall fell silent. Every eye turned to Brynn. She could feel the weight of it. The power. One word and she could spare a life. Show mercy. Be the bigger person. She thought about it. Really thought about it. Then she thought about Grayson and Beckett, 4 years old, being dragged through the snow in a burlap sack. She thought about Sarah, the nanny, lying dead at the bottom of a ravine. She thought about the vial of poison thrown at 2 small children. I believe in mercy, Brynn said slowly. I believe people can change, can grow, can become better than they were. Seraphine's eyes flickered with hope. But you didn't steal to survive, Brynn continued. You didn't make a mistake in a moment of weakness. You planned meticulously and coldly to murder innocent children, to seize power you didn't earn and didn't deserve. Some lines once crossed cannot be uncrossed. She looked at Callum. No pardon. The execution took place in the courtyard as the sun set over the Montana Rockies. The entire pack formed a circle. Seraphine was bound to a post. Dr. Hale administered the injection with clinical precision. Seraphine screamed. It was a sound of pure agony as the silver burned through her veins from the inside out. But it lasted only 30 seconds. Then silence. It was done. Justice had been served. 2 weeks later, on a night when the full moon hung huge and silver over the forest, a small group gathered in a clearing half a mile from Thornwood Manor. There were no elaborate decorations, just moonlight, a bonfire, and the people who mattered most. Callum stood beside the fire in a dark suit, no tie, his shirt open at the collar. Brynn wore a simple white dress, bare feet, a crown of wildflowers in her red hair. Grayson and Beckett stood beside them, freshly bathed, wearing matching little suits. Elder Thomas officiated with Rhodes Dr. Hale and a handful of the most trusted pack members as witnesses. The moon goddess does not ask our permission, Thomas said, his old voice carrying clearly in the quiet night. She does not explain her choices. She simply knows. He turned to Callum. Callum Thornwood, Alpha of Thornwood Pack, do you accept this human woman as your fated mate, your Luna, the completion of your soul? Callum's eyes never left Brynn's face. I do, he said, with everything I am. Thomas turned to Brynn. Brynn Ashford, daughter of earth and sky, do you accept this wolf as your fated mate, your Alpha, the completion of your soul, knowing the bond will outlast your human lifespan? Brynn's voice was steady, clear, certain. I didn't choose this world, she said, but I choose him, every day, for every day I have. The binding ritual was simple but powerful. Callum shifted one hand, partially, claws extending. He made a small cut across Brynn's palm. She didn't flinch. Then she took a ceremonial knife, silver-bladed, and cut his palm in return. He didn't flinch either, though she knew the silver burned him. They clasped hands, their blood mixing, running together. Blood to blood, Elder Thomas intoned. Soul to soul, moon goddess bear witness. The full moon above them seemed to glow brighter, as if responding to the words. Grayson and Beckett stepped forward, each holding a small crown of flowers they'd woven themselves that afternoon. Grayson placed his on Brynn's head, adjusting it carefully. Beckett placed his on Callum's. Now you're really married, Grayson announced solemnly. And you're really our mama, Beckett added, looking up at Brynn with those big amber eyes. Brynn's vision blurred with tears. She pulled both boys into a fierce hug. I would be honored, she whispered. Elder Thomas smiled, the lines of his ancient face creasing with joy. By the old laws and the moon above, I pronounce you mated. Forever bound. Callum kissed Brynn deep and claiming and tender all at once. From miles away back at the manor, the rest of the pack howled. They felt the bond snap into place, the connection between Alpha and Luna solidifying, strengthening the pack bonds for everyone. It was done. They were one. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change. Brynn discovered that being Luna wasn't just a title. It was a She sat in on council meetings learning pack law and tradition. She mediated disputes between pack members. She organized the household staff and oversaw the estate's considerable finances. but she also made changes. 3 months after the mating ceremony, she stood before the council with a proposal. The Human-Wolf Relations Committee, a formal structure for vetting human mates, for teaching them wolf culture, for protecting them legally. For too long, we've treated human mates as aberrations, Brynn said, her voice carrying confidence now, as problems to be hidden or eliminated. But the moon goddess pairs souls, not species. If she chooses to bind a human to a wolf, who are we to question that? Elder Thomas was skeptical. This is unprecedented, he said. So was a human walking through a blizzard to save your alpha heirs? Brynn replied calmly. Unprecedented doesn't mean wrong. It means we have a chance to be better than we were. The vote was 9-3 in favor. The reforms didn't stop there. New safety protocols for all pack children, subcutaneous GPS implants that couldn't be removed or disabled, mandatory 2-guard minimum for any alpha heir outside the manor, a scholarship fund in Sarah's name for Omega caregivers. Council modernization, evidence-based trials became standard. Telepathic testimony was formally admissible with proper corroboration. And most controversially, term limits for council elders. 10 years maximum, then mandatory retirement. That one barely passed 6-6, with Elder Thomas casting the deciding vote in favor. I'm 87, he said with a dry smile. It's time for new blood anyway. In her spare time, Brynn returned to her photography. She converted one of the estate's old stables into a studio. Her work took on new dimensions now. She photographed the pack in both forms, capturing the duality of their nature. The images were stunning, and they told a story the world had never seen. National Geographic picked up the series. Wildlife Photographer of the Year nominated her as a finalist. Her TED Talk, Living Between Two Worlds, went viral. She was building a bridge between species, one photograph at a time. And then 4 months after the mating ceremony came the surprise. Brynn had been feeling off for a week. Tired, nauseous in the mornings. She assumed it was stress, or maybe she'd picked up a bug from one of the pack children who'd been sick. Doctor. Haley insisted on a full checkup. Callum sat beside her in the clinic, holding her hand when Dr. Hale came back with the blood test results. The doctor's face was carefully neutral, but Brynn could see the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Congratulations, Luna, he said. Brynn blinked. For what? You're pregnant, about 8 weeks along. The world seemed to stop. I'm what? Brynn whispered. Pregnant. Dr. Hale repeated, his smile breaking through now. Human wolf conception is extremely rare, but the mate bond apparently facilitates it. I've read about 3 cases in the last century. The children tend to develop faster than purely human babies and inherit traits from both parents. Callum was staring at Brynn with an expression of wonder. We're having a baby, he said as if he couldn't quite believe it. We're having a baby, Brynn confirmed, starting to laugh through sudden tears. Callum pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass and diamonds. When they told Grayson and Beckett that night, the boys were ecstatic. A sister, Grayson shouted. I want a sister. How do you know it's a girl? Beckett asked. I just know, Grayson said with 5-year-old certainty. He was right. 6 months later, Brynn gave birth to a baby girl they named Kira. She was perfect. Tiny, with wisps of red hair and eyes that shifted between human brown and wolf amber, depending on her mood. She shifted for the first time at 6 months old, earlier than any pure-blooded wolf pup in recorded history. Dr. Hale said she'd probably be walking by 8 months. He was right about that, too. 1 year after that terrible night when Brynn had stumbled through the doors carrying 2 dying pups, Thornwood Manor hosted an event that would have been unthinkable 2 years before. An art exhibition, open to the public, humans and wolves mixing freely. The manor's grand gallery had been transformed. 40 large-format photographs hung on the walls, each one a masterpiece of composition and emotion. Wolves in their natural habitat, pack members in human-form portraits that captured their strength and vulnerability. And the centerpiece, a black-and-white image of Callum with Grayson and Beckett, all 3 of them laughing, utterly natural, utterly human, despite what they could become. The title of the exhibition, Wolves of the Rockies, a Family Portrait. Over 200 people attended. Pack members, of course, but also humans from the nearby towns who'd been carefully vetted and briefed. Regional press. Even representatives from neutral packs who'd come to see this human Luna everyone was talking about. Brynn stood at the front of the gallery wearing a simple green dress, her red hair loose around her shoulders. Kira, now 18 months old, sat on her hip, playing with a strand of her mother's hair. 6 months ago, I was a stranger in a storm, Brynn said, her voice carrying through the hushed crowd. Today, I'm honored to call Thornwood home. These photographs represent a bridge. For too long, our worlds, human and wolf, existed in fear of each other. Fear breeds violence. Understanding breeds peace. I'm not asking humans to forget caution. Wolves are powerful, dangerous if threatened, but power doesn't equal evil. These images show the truth. Wolves are families. They love, they grieve, they protect their own. And some of them, she smiled, are brave enough to let a clumsy human photographer into their lives. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Callum emerged from the back of the room, Grayson and Beckett at his sides. Both boys had grown in the past year, taller and stronger, but still children, still young enough to hold their father's hands. That clumsy photographer, Callum said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Save my sons, save this pack, save me." He walked through the crowd to Brynn and took her free hand. "She's not just Luna, she's the reason we're all still standing." The pack members howled, the sound starting low and building, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The humans in the crowd looked startled at first, then amazed, then moved. It was a sound of approval, of joy, of family. Later that evening, as the manor settled into quiet, Brynn found Rhodes on the terrace overlooking the forest. He stood alone, hands in his pockets, watching the moon rise. "You never told me her name," Brynn said, softly approaching. Rhodes didn't turn. "Ilara, she was a tracker, best in 3 territories." A pause. "The hunters ambushed her patrol 5 years ago. Silver bullets. She died in my arms." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Rhodes finally looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled. A real smile. "Watching you and Callum, watching those boys heal, it reminded me that the bond doesn't end with death. It just changes shape. Ilara would have liked you, would have said you have a tracker's instincts." Brynn touched his arm. "Thank you. For everything. For guarding that cell. For believing in me." "Thank you," Rhodes said, "for reminding an old soldier what we're fighting for." As the crowd mingled after Brynn's speech, a silver-haired woman approached. She wore the crest of the Northern Coalition on her lapel. "Luna Brynn," she said formally. "I am Magistrate Kira Frost, Northern Coalition. I came here skeptical." She paused. "I leave here, impressed. Your reforms, your transparency, your strength. Perhaps we've been wrong about human-wolf bonds." Callum appeared at Brynn's side. "Does this mean—" "It means," Kira interrupted, "the Coalition will be watching. But not with hostility, with curiosity. You've set a precedent, Alpha Thornwood. Let's see if it holds." She bowed slightly and walked away. Brynn exhaled. "That's not exactly an endorsement." "No," Callum agreed, squeezing her hand, "but it's not a declaration of war either. It's a start." After the exhibition, after the guests had left and the manor had quieted, Brynn found herself on the roof. It was the same spot where she and Callum had sat months before, talking about mortality and time and the price of loving someone who would outlive you. But tonight she wasn't alone. Callum sat beside her, Kira sleeping in his arms. Grayson and Beckett were there too, sitting cross-legged, looking up at the stars. "Papa," Grayson said, "tell us the story again." "Which story?" Callum asked, though he knew. "The storm," Beckett said, "when Mama found us." Brynn smiled. It was their favorite story now, the tale of how their family had been forged. Callum's voice took on that narrative quality, the tone of a storyteller weaving myth. "It was the worst storm in 50 years, he began. 2 little boys were lost in the cold and dark. Everyone thought they were gone forever. But a stranger, a brave human woman with a camera and a kind heart, heard them crying. And she didn't run away," Grayson added. He'd heard this story so many times he knew it by heart. "No," Callum agreed. "She didn't run. She didn't leave them to die. She walked through the blizzard, through the darkness, through her own fear. She carried them to safety." His voice grew softer, more intimate. "And when she knocked on our door, she didn't just save 2 lives. She saved a whole pack. She saved me." Brynn's voice came as a whisper reading from memory. "They asked me if I'd do it again. If I'd walk through that storm, risk everything for 2 children I'd never met. The answer is simple, every time, without hesitation. Because some doors, once you walk through them, you realize you were always meant to open. This is my family. This is my home. This is my pack." Below them, the entire Thornwood pack assembled in the courtyard, over 300 wolves and humans, standing together looking up at the family on the roof. United, strong, changed. And in the darkness, a single wolf howled, then another, and another, until the mountains themselves sang with the sound of family, of survival, of hope.